us are surrounded by people on a regular basis, and it's easy for us to paint the picture that we're not all that important. But the truth is, we matter a great deal. And we're going to start this morning by looking in Mark chapter 2. We're going to start by looking in Mark chapter 2. And I'm not reinventing the wheel by any means. These are going to be very familiar to you. But I hope that they'll present some insight that we'll be able to take and really make an application of. This one is extremely fascinating to me in Mark chapter 2. It says, again, he entered Capernaum after some days, and it was heard that he was in the house. Immediately many gathered together, so there was no longer room to receive them, not even near the door, and he preached the word to them. Then they came to him, bringing a paralytic who was carried by 4 men. And when they could not come near him because of the crowd, they uncovered the roof where he was. So when they had broken through, they let down the bed on which the paralytic was lying. When Jesus saw their faith, and I guess I'll just stop there. Jesus is doing in Mark chapter 2 what he wanted to do, what he came to do. He's in a house and he's preaching the word, and the house is so full that literally nobody else can get in. In the meantime, there's this paralyzed man. And how we're going to look at him this morning is the paralyzed man is totally dependent. He's not in a position to take care of his own need. He's got to have help. Now I will step back and I'll remind you this morning, the paralyzed man is easy. We go about our business day to day and we see somebody in his physical condition being so dependent, and it's easy for us to recognize where they are. Frankly, we come across a lot of dependent people. Some are not as easy to notice. They seem to have the best of this life, but they have struggles and difficulties and adversities, and they're in every bit as much need as this guy is in Mark chapter 2. The difference is we have to look a little closer. But there were 4 guys who came across this man who was paralyzed, and they thought, well, maybe if we can get him to this guy Jesus, maybe if we can put him in a place where Jesus is, that maybe Jesus can give him the help that he needs. So 4 men carried this paralyzed man to the door of this house where Jesus was, thinking that if they get him to Jesus, Jesus can give him some help. And they get to the door, and they can't get in because the house is so full. And they stood there and they were kind of discouraged. But after a while, they started looking at each other and said, no, we tried. And they carried that paralyzed man home. And those 4 guys slept good that night. Because they knew they'd done what they tried. They made an effort. It didn't work out. They couldn't get in the door, but at least they tried. And they slept good that night. Now you know, like I know, that's baloney. That's not the way it happened. But I will tell you this, just to be fair. It'd be hard for me to argue that they could have slept good that night. And I tell you the primary reason is because I figured I probably would have. I figured if I'd have gone to the effort they went to, you know, it wasn't the modern conveniences of transportation like it is in our day. To say that they carried that paralyzed man on a mat, I think we would understand it best to say it was pretty much a blanket. 4 guys carrying a corner, carrying a blanket of a paralyzed man. It was hard work. It wasn't easy. The truth is, it was a situation that if any one of those four failed to do their part, any one of them, the guy's on the ground. It is dependent on the four men working together as a team. So when they get to the door and they can't get in the house, it would have been easy for them to say, well, at least we tried, and they could have slept good that night. I think I would have. But one of them obviously noticed, hey, reckon we can get him up on that roof? Reckon we could take him up and lower him to where Jesus is? Reckon we can go to that. Now, if you think it was tough getting a man on a blanket to the house where Jesus was, how about this? Getting him on the roof. And then they have to remove the portions of the roof to lower him down to where Jesus was. You think about how hard these four men worked to get him to Jesus. Now, I don't know if I guess you noticed it, but when I was reading there in Mark chapter 2, I get kind of mid-verse in verse 5, and I come to the word there, and I stop. Because it says in verse 5 that Jesus saw their faith. There is a plural word that is speaking of these four men. Now, you know the rest of the story. You know what Jesus was able to do with that paralyzed man. You know that that paralyzed man was lowered to the floor on a mat and went out carrying it. You know that Jesus forgave him, that Jesus made his life different. Jesus did things for the paralyzed man that day that nobody else could do, but none of it happens without the actions of those four, and we don't even know their name. But they were vital, and they were necessary. Here's kind of the oddity. Here's the oddity. The Bible gets to verse 5 where it says that Jesus saw their faith. So there's this great declaration of the trust that they had that Jesus could be the one that could make a difference for this man. But at the same time, that's the last thing you read about him. For the four men, the story ends in verse 5. That's it. They fade to black. They're no longer a part of the story. They go their way. The rest was left up to Jesus. Now, so here's the questions that we're left to ask. Were the four men limited? Did they face boundaries? Was there only so much they could do? Sure. As a matter of fact, they did not have the capacity to give that man what he ultimately needed the most. But their role was vital, and it was essential, and Jesus doesn't do his part for the paralyzed man if the four men don't do theirs. Right? Everybody matters. Jesus is the drama. He's the life giver. He's the Savior. He's the healer. He's the difference maker. Those four, we don't even know their name. I can never be who Jesus was. I can never do what Jesus did. But those four, they're a picture of me. They're a picture of my day-to-day. They're a picture of my everyday. Because the chances are pretty good for every one of us in this room. We have the exact same opportunities every day of our lives that those four had that day. We come across somebody that is totally dependent. And if we don't help them, they never get to where they need to be. Now, I'm going to admit something to you. I'm bringing in, this was a late addition, Todd, to my preparation for this class. But I felt like as I was looking at it, that this would be a vital one for us to mention. Will you look with me at Mark chapter 10 just for a second? We won't be here long, and this was a late addition. This wasn't even a part of my plans for this session with the Everybody Matters, and we don't even know their name, and I wasn't even going to go here, but I just got to thinking about it, and I thought this would probably be a good one for us to also include, and for us, I think people like us need to think about what we're going to see here in Mark chapter 10. And let me take a step back before I even look at this passage in Mark chapter 10. And I also want to mention this. I take the Bible for what it says. I just do. I take the Bible for what it says. And so when you look at events that take place over the course of Scripture, and people have opportunities to do things, whether it's Moses to go into the Egyptian bondage and lead God's people out, and other extreme circumstances like that. I look at the Bible for what it says, so that when people have an opportunity to serve, they either serve or they don't serve. And I don't always go with the assumption, well, somebody else will always do it. I don't take that stretch to say, well, if somebody doesn't do what they have the opportunity to do, there'll always be somebody else that'll step in, and it doesn't matter whether I do it. I think it does matter. And so I just thought we needed to include Mark chapter 10 just for a second. I'm at that age, by the way, I'm 55 years old. I'm at that age where I'm getting to the point that I know I need to lick my fingers before I turn a page, but I'm also in that struggling stage in that sometimes I lick the wrong finger. Just bear with me and be patient with somebody my age. Okay, I'm in Mark chapter 10, and I want to mention one thing about this, and we're not going to be here long. Starting in verse 17, as he was going out on the road, one came running, knelt before him, and asked him, "Good teacher, what shall I do that I may inherit eternal life?" And you know what it says here. Jesus said, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but one, that is God. You know the commandments. Do not commit adultery. Do not murder. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness. Do not defraud. Honor your father and your mother." He answered and said to him, "Teacher, all these things I have kept from my youth." And watch this. Then Jesus, looking at him, loved him and said, "One thing you lack, go your way, sell whatever you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come, take up the cross and follow me." Now watch this. And we don't even know his name. But he was sad at this word and went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. And the reason I thought it'd be a good idea to insert this into our Bible study this morning. Okay. We call him the rich young ruler. And he humbled himself at the feet of Jesus. And he asked just the right question. And he had a really good background. Most of us would have liked him. I bet he was good looking too. I don't know. Just seem like people like that usually are. But he just seemed like he had the pedigree that we want our sons to be like. We want our daughters to marry. Everything was good. And Jesus, the Bible says, had a love for him. And he told him, "There's one thing you lack. Go and sell what you have and give to the poor, and come follow me." And then here's the operative phrase. You ready for it? He went away sorrowful. He was rich, he had a lot of possessions, and he didn't want to let go of his stuff. But the reason I felt like it was so important to include it this morning is because it leads me to ask this question. What might have been? What could have been? What could this guy have done as a follower of Jesus? What opportunities did this guy have to serve on a day-to-day basis? He had it all. And he chose to just go away. Because he didn't want to let go of this material life that he really seemed to enjoy. And that he was not willing to let go of. And so I think about the moment by moments that would come for him on a regular basis, where he would have this grand opportunity to do so much good for so many people, and he passed by. How many people could have been brought to Jesus through his efforts? How many poor, struggling people could have been given some sustenance of life by this guy who chose to say no? Who chose to say, not me? And so I believe when we look at an example of how everybody matters, it's probably a good idea for us to realize not everybody comes through. And when somebody has the opportunity to come through and they don't, somebody somewhere suffers for it. Somebody doesn't receive what they could have received because I failed to do what I can. We look at 4 men who went to the absolute extreme to get that paralyzed man to the feet of Jesus. How many dependent people do I come across on a daily basis? Or do I find myself to be like that rich young ruler who has the opportunity to really matter, to really make a difference? And I just choose to walk away. I don't want to make the investment of time. How about for that young man? I don't want to make the sacrifice. To be fair, when we look at glowing examples of people who really come through and show that they're what seems to be an anonymous life really matters. It's probably good to always remind ourselves of that personal choice that we have. We can come through or we can fail to serve. The choice always remains with us. And that's the opportunity to obey, to serve, to commit, or to not. I used to say, and I'll throw this in, then I'll do one more passage this morning in class. I used to say, the most important decision a person ever makes is the decision to become a Christian. I don't say that anymore. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's the way that it needs to be expressed. In my judgment, the most important decision that a person will ever make is the decision to become a Christian or not. Because for a person to know what they need to do and say no, that's still the most important decision they'll ever make. Because that's a decision they're ready to live for an eternity with. One way or another. And I know in this room right now, there's a lot of those 4 men. There's a lot of people that go to the extreme, that go to the limits, doing everything they can for those dependent people that you come across every day, recognizing that you matter, that you can really make a difference. I know this area has benefited from your service, but could it be sometimes we're like that rich young ruler that Jesus calls to serve? And we just say, not today. And you just have to wonder how much good that could be done fails to get done when little old me, I mean that figuratively, not literally, but when little old me says, not today. Now, one more passage for class, and this one is in Mark chapter 12. Mark chapter 12, I want to look at it during our time together here in class. We're going to start in verse 41, okay? Jesus sat opposite the treasury and saw how the people put money into the treasury, and many who were rich put in much. Then one poor widow came and threw in 2 mites, which make a quadrans. So he called his disciples to himself and said to them, Assuredly I say to you that this poor widow has put in more than all those who've given to the treasury. For they all put in out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty put in all that she had, her whole livelihood. And here's where I want to start. If I'd have been there that day, she'd have been an embarrassment. To be honest, with my human eyes, if I watched that lady, and by the way, you talk about we don't even know her name, all we know her as is poor widow. That's how we know her. And I tell you the truth, with my human eyes, if I watch her walk in that room and have the audacity to drop in that plate those 2 coins that might not even buy a piece of bubble gum today, I'd be embarrassed for her. Every now and then at North Tuscaloosa, I serve as a preacher and also as one of the elders there. And every now and then I come across the contribution. And you know, and today in 2019, we don't get a lot of change in the plate. You know, there's not much. Not a whole lot of coins coming there on a regular basis. We don't. Our kids don't do a whole lot of relating to coins. You know, they relate more to bills than they do to coins. That's just the world we live in right now. And we don't see a lot. For that woman to have the nerve to walk into that, and these other fellas are standing around and they're giving great amounts. The truth is, I've probably been pretty impressed with what I saw from them. Because that's the best my eyes can do. And I saw what she did. I'd be embarrassed for her. That's the best my human eyes. That's what I see. But the truth is, Jesus doesn't limit himself to external. Jesus knows internal. He knows your external maximum, and he knows your internal reality. And so that even though Clark Sims looks at it, and I get it all wrong from a perception standpoint, Jesus got it just right. And here that poor widow was. What in my eyes would basically be embarrassing. How do you have the nerve to walk in and put that in? For this very same person that I might be embarrassed for, Jesus says she's the standard of giving. So if I stand in an auditorium like we are this morning in 2019, in October of 2019, we open up our Bibles and we look to her story as the standard of what it means to give. Why? Because she gave everything she had. Now, it wasn't much. It was a small, what we would call amount. But Jesus, who's not limited to external, who also knows the internal reality, understood that she was given everything that she had. And that's the standard that we're measured by today. That's the ultimate standard of giving that was demonstrated by a woman who didn't hardly give a thing. And she walked out of that room with nothing. Of course, I guess you could argue she walked out of that room with everything. Because she walked out of that room with an understanding of what really matters, that those fellas who were dropping in the big amounts, that the Bible says was given of their surplus, given of what they had left, that they didn't get. And for the Bible to include, and if it's included in our Bible, there's a reason for it, and we can learn something from it. For us to look at what happens here, we understand that we're all measured individually with how we utilize what we've been entrusted with. And we're expected to give and contribute a standard that's based on the one that Jesus described she lived by. She gave what she had. And to somebody that we might have looked at as being an embarrassment, she's the standard of what it means to give. Everybody matters. And we don't even know her name. Everybody matters. 4 men who brought him to the feet of Jesus. They couldn't heal. They couldn't give life. But he never gets to Jesus without those 4 men. He was full of resources. He was full of what could be. And he chose to walk away. My question is, what could have been done by that one who chose to ignore what he could do? Now my question is, can you find yourself somewhere in these passages this morning of people that we don't even know their name? Am I one of the 4 who made great sacrifices, understanding the value of my role? Am I like that poor widow who might look to the world to be somewhat one-talented, not a whole lot to contribute, but Jesus actually uses as the standard of somebody that gives what they have? Or am I like that resource, that rich young ruler who lives my life with what could be when I choose to walk away? A number of years ago, I was asked to speak in a youth program in Rome, Georgia. And they had this youth program on the grounds of Berry College. And Berry College is like one of the largest, or the largest campuses in the United States. It's a huge, out in the mountains, wooded campus. It's just beautiful up there, Berry College. And they had this youth program there on this great campus. And I'm not a man of the woods at all. I benefit from those who are, but I'm not a woodsman, or I don't do a lot, that kind. So I head over to Rome, Georgia, and my son Christian goes with me. And at that time, Christian was a young boy, probably 5 or 6 or so years old, and we made this trip over to this youth program. And I remember they had us in really nice cabins, and we were staying up in the hills there on this campus, and they were really nice cabins where we were staying. And then the program was in a multi-purpose center down in the valley below where we were staying up in our cabins. And so it was a Saturday night, and I was going to speak down in that multi-purpose building down in the valley through the woods. That could be a song. But I mean, we were up in the hills. the program was going to be at the multi-purpose center down in the valley, and you'd have to go through a lot of woods and a lot of trees, and it was just dark as it could be, and I had no idea where I was going. And there was a guy named Rusty who was there at this retreat. And so I got word that Rusty knew how to get from up in the hills at the cabins where we were staying, that he knew how to get from there down to the multi-purpose center. You know, and even though it's dark, Rusty knew how to get from up in the hills at the cabins down to the multi-purpose center. I had no idea where I was going. So my complete plan was I was going to follow Rusty. Okay, that's part A. Here's the rest of the story. Christian's 5 or 6 years old. And I'm just going to tell you the truth. Rusty didn't mean a thing in this world to Christian. He didn't know Rusty. He didn't trust Rusty. And he was not about to walk through those dark woods following Rusty. Rusty didn't mean a thing to him. But he knew his dad. And so he was going to follow his dad wherever his dad went. So we left up in those hills there at that Georgia camp, and this was our pattern. Clark followed Rusty. Christian followed Clark, who was following Rusty. I follow Jesus. He knows where he's going. He knows how to get there. And he knows what we need. There are dependent people who cross my path. They don't know anything about Jesus. But they know Clark. Insignificant, my life matters, Clark. And so the pattern that we live spiritually is just the same. There's somebody out there who will ultimately follow Jesus because of who and what they see and they follow in you. 4 men, 1 poor widow. They mattered. 1 rich young ruler. What could have been. God bless you. Thank you this morning.